In 1945, the U.S. Army admits William Friedman to a psychiatric hospital. The official diagnosis: severe anxiety from overwork. The real reason: this former math teacher had cracked Japan's diplomatic code 18 months before Pearl Harbor, gave American leaders the ability to read Tokyo's secret messages, warning that war was coming, identified the exact moment Japan would strike, and still couldn't prevent 2,403 Americans from dying. This is the story of a man who accomplished the impossible and discovered that seeing the future clearly is sometimes the cruelest burden of all. This wasn't just about breaking a code. This was about preventing a war that would kill millions, or at least seeing it coming. By mid-1940, Japan had already invaded Manchuria, was deep into China, and was eyeing Southeast Asia's oil fields and rubber plantations. Japanese diplomats worldwide were receiving encrypted instructions from Tokyo about territorial expansion, military alliances, and war preparations. Every single word was scrambled by a machine the Japanese called 97 Shiki Obun Injiki, the alphabetical typewriter 97. American intelligence called it Purple. The stakes were existential. If Friedman failed, the United States would be blind to Japan's intentions. American policymakers would negotiate in the dark. The Pacific Fleet would have no warning. Thousands of American lives hung on whether one man could do something that cryptographic experts worldwide considered impossible: break a machine cipher without ever seeing the machine. But there's something else at stake too. Something more personal. William Friedman is about to discover that seeing the future doesn't mean you can change it, and that knowledge will break something inside him that no amount of mathematical genius can fix. To understand what Friedman is up against, you need to understand what purple actually is. Since 1939, Japanese diplomats have been using purple machines to communicate with Tokyo. The device looks like two electric typewriters facing each other, connected by a mess of wires and telephone stepping switches. The same technology that routes phone calls. When a Japanese diplomat types a letter on one keyboard, the machine scrambles it through a series of electrical pathways so complex that the encrypted letter coming out bears no mathematical relationship to the input that a human can detect. Here's what makes purple unbreakable. Traditional codes and ciphers follow patterns. Substitute A for D, and every A becomes D. The Enigma machine used by Nazi Germany scrambles letters through rotating wheels, but those wheels follow predictable mechanical sequences. Mathematicians can exploit those patterns. Purple uses telephone stepping switches. These switches can route electrical signals through millions of possible pathways. They don't rotate in predictable sequences. They jump. They skip. They create what cryptographers call nonlinear polyalphabetic substitution, which is a fancy way of saying the machine scrambles each letter differently based on an algorithm so complex that even with unlimited time and resources, you shouldn't be able to crack it without the machine itself. The Japanese are so confident in Purple's security that they use it for their most sensitive diplomatic traffic: messages about military planning, troop movements, alliance negotiations with Germany and Italy, intelligence gathered from Japanese spies worldwide. And the Americans are intercepting every single transmission. The U.S. Army's Signal Intelligence Service in 1940 is not a sophisticated operation. It's 8 people working in a temporary building near the munitions building in Washington, D.C. The annual budget is $17,600. The entire American code-breaking establishment could fit in a school bus. But they have William Friedman. Born Wolf Friedman in Kishinev, Russia in 1891, he immigrated to Pittsburgh at age 1. He studied genetics at Cornell, worked at a research farm, and somehow, through a series of accidents involving World War I and a wealthy, eccentric woman named Elizabeth Smith, became America's preeminent cryptanalyst. By June 1940, Friedman has already broken dozens of Japanese codes. But Purple is different. His team has been intercepting Purple messages since March 1939. Over a year already. They know the messages are important because of their frequency and the diplomatic channels using them. But every attempt at traditional cryptanalysis fails. The messages don't follow any pattern. Frequency analysis, the technique that breaks most codes, reveals nothing. The letters appear completely random. Friedman's colleagues at Britain's Bletchley Park, who are successfully attacking German Enigma, tell him purple is impossible. A Polish mathematician who escaped to France suggests it might take decades. A Navy cryptanalyst in Washington recommends giving up and focusing on codes they can actually break. Friedman refuses. He assembles his team: Frank Rowlett, a 31-year-old mathematician from Virginia; Abraham Sinkoff, 33, also a mathematician; Solomon Kolbach, 34, another mathematician; Robert Ferner, the only one with actual engineering experience, and several others cycling in and out. In June 1940, Friedman makes a decision that will change everything. He tells his team, "We're not trying to break their code. We're going to build their machine." Here's how Friedman approaches the impossible. First, he needs cribs. Messages where he knows both the encrypted version and the actual plain text. The State Department helps. Japanese diplomats often send routine messages with predictable content. "I have the honor to acknowledge receipt of your message dated." These formal diplomatic phrases give Friedman anchor points. By comparing the encrypted and plain text versions, he can start mapping relationships. Not patterns. Purple doesn't have simple patterns, but relationships. When plain text A becomes encrypted Q in one position and encrypted F in another position 10 letters later, that tells him something about how the machine's internal switches are moving. Second, Friedman makes a crucial insight. Purple must have limitations. Telephone stepping switches can only move in certain ways. They have mechanical constraints. They can step forward, but not backward. They can switch pathways, but only along specific routes determined by their physical wiring. These constraints mean purple isn't completely random. It's pseudo-random, following rules that, if discovered, can be reverse-engineered. For 4 months, Friedman works 14-hour days, 7 days a week. He fills thousands of worksheets with letter frequencies, position analyses, and probability calculations. He looks for what he calls ghosts, tiny statistical anomalies that appear when you analyze thousands of messages together. In September 1940, he finds one. In position 25 of purple messages, exactly the 25th letter, there's a microscopic statistical bias. Certain letters appear 0.3% more frequently than pure randomness would allow. It's so small that it's almost meaningless. Almost. But that 0.3% tells Friedman that one of purple's stepping switches resets every 25 steps. It's the first thread. He pulls it. But discovering how purple works and actually building a working machine are two completely different problems. And Friedman is about to hit a wall that nearly ends the entire project. By October 1940, Friedman has mapped what he believes is purple's basic architecture: 2 separate encryption systems working simultaneously. One scrambles 6 letters of the alphabet, let's say A through F. The other scrambles the remaining 20 letters, G through Z. Each system uses different stepping switches with different reset intervals. It's brilliant engineering. By splitting the alphabet, the Japanese have made frequency analysis useless. The 6-letter system and the 20-letter system have completely different statistical signatures. But here's the problem. Friedman doesn't know which 6 letters are separated. Is it A, B, C, D, E, F? Is it A, E, I, O, U, Y? Is it the most common letters in English? In Japanese romanization? There are thousands of possible combinations, and without knowing the 6 letters, he can't build the machine. This is where Frank Rowlett becomes crucial. Rowlett is everything Friedman isn't. Where Friedman is intense, theoretical, almost mystical in his approach to cryptography, Rowlett is practical. He's the son of a Virginia grocer. He worked his way through college. He thinks in concrete terms: wires, switches, electrical pathways. While Friedman attacks the mathematical problem, Rowlett starts experimenting with actual telephone stepping switches. He orders them from Western Electric, claiming they're for telephone system research. He builds small test circuits on workbenches, and he makes a discovery. Telephone stepping switches have a physical quirk. They work most efficiently when routing 20 connections versus 6 connections. It's not a rule. It's just that the standard switches manufactured in the 1930s are optimized for that ratio, because that's how telephone exchanges typically route calls. If the Japanese engineers were using off-the-shelf stepping switches, and why would they custom build them? They would naturally use the 20/6 configuration. Rowlett tells Friedman, the 6 letters aren't chosen for linguistic reasons. They're chosen for engineering efficiency. Friedman tests Rowlett's theory. He assumes the 6 separated letters are those that would create the most efficient electrical pathways in a standard stepping switch system. Based on Japanese romanization patterns and standard switch configurations, he tries A-E-I-O-U-Y, vowels. The 6 letters are the vowels. Within 2 weeks, patterns start emerging from the noise. Now comes the engineering challenge. Friedman knows the theoretical structure. Rowlett needs to build it physically. From November 1940 through August 1941, 9 months, the team works in almost complete isolation. They requisition telephone stepping switches without explaining why. They build purple-colored circuits on breadboards. That's actually why they call it purple. They wire switches in series and parallel. They test different reset intervals. They burn out dozens of switches. They argue over pathway configurations. Friedman pushes himself beyond exhaustion. He's sleeping 4 hours a night. He's not eating properly. His wife, Elizabeth, herself a renowned cryptanalyst, begs him to slow down. He can't, because Japanese-American tensions are escalating. In July 1941, Japan invades southern Indochina. The United States responds with oil embargoes. Japanese diplomats in Washington are meeting with Secretary of State Cordell Hull almost daily, negotiating, stalling, making demands. And every diplomatic message between Tokyo and Japanese ambassadors is encrypted with purple. September 25th, 1941. In a cramped room in the munitions building, Frank Rowlett flips a switch on a contraption that looks like 2 typewriters married to a telephone switchboard. He types a test message. A purple encrypted intercept from the Japanese embassy in Washington, received 2 days earlier. The machine clacks and hums. Stepping switches click through their sequences, and on the output typewriter, letters appear. Plain text. Readable Japanese diplomatic language. They've done it. They've built purple without ever seeing a purple machine. The team celebrates for exactly 1 evening. Then the real work begins. Now the Signal Intelligence Service can read Japan's diplomatic secrets in near real time. Messages from Tokyo to Ambassador Kichisaburo Nomura in Washington. Instructions to the Japanese embassy in Berlin. Intelligence reports from Japanese military attachés worldwide. The decrypted messages are codenamed Magic, because what Friedman's team accomplished seems like magic. Throughout October and November 1941, Magic reveals increasingly ominous intelligence. October 16th, Tokyo tells Ambassador Nomura that negotiations with the United States have a deadline, late November. After that, things are automatically going to happen. November 5th, Tokyo sends a message with the phrase, "This time we mean it," referring to a final negotiating deadline. November 19th, Tokyo tells Nomura to keep negotiating, but warns that a climax is approaching. November 22nd, Tokyo extends the deadline to November 29th, but adds, after that, things are automatically going to happen. Friedman and his team are reading these messages within hours of their transmission. They're translating them. They're distributing them to Army Chief of Staff George Marshall, Secretary of State Hull, and a tiny circle of officials with magic clearance. Everyone can see war is coming. The messages make it absolutely clear. Japan will take military action if negotiations fail. But here's what the messages don't say: where and when. Because while Friedman has cracked Purple, the diplomatic cipher, there's another code he can't break. JN25, the Japanese Navy operational code. And that's where the actual war plans are hidden. Purple tells American leaders that Japan is preparing for war. But it doesn't reveal the target. Is it the Philippines? British Malaya? The Dutch East Indies? All three? In late November, American military intelligence tracks a Japanese carrier fleet leaving port. Magic intercepts diplomatic messages ordering Japanese embassies to destroy code books and prepare for severed relations. On December 1st, 1941, a magic decrypt reveals Tokyo telling its Washington embassy to be ready to receive a 14-part message, something long and formal. Probably a declaration of the end of negotiations, possibly a declaration of war. Friedman's team is on high alert. When the 14-part message starts arriving on December 6th, they decrypt each part within 30 minutes of interception. They work through the night. President Roosevelt reads the first 13 parts that evening and remarks to his aide, "This means war." The 14th part arrives early morning on December 7th. It tells Ambassador Nomura to deliver the full message to Secretary Hull at exactly 1 p.m. Washington time. Army intelligence recognizes the significance. 1 p.m. in Washington is 7:30 a.m. in Hawaii. Something is going to happen at that exact moment. A warning is drafted for Pacific military commanders, including Admiral Husband Kimmel at Pearl Harbor. But here's where everything falls apart. It's Sunday morning, December 7th. The warning message to Pearl Harbor goes through commercial telegraph because the Army's direct radio link to Hawaii is down for maintenance. The message lands at the Honolulu Telegraph Office at 7:33 a.m. local time. A Japanese-American motorcycle courier named Tadao Fuchikami puts it in his delivery queue. It's not marked urgent. He has other deliveries to make first. At 7:53 a.m., 353 Japanese aircraft attack Pearl Harbor. The telegraph warning is delivered to Admiral Kimmel's headquarters at 11:45 a.m., 4 hours after the attack began. In Washington, William Friedman hears the news over the radio. He's at home, finally resting after working through the night on the 14-part message. He accomplished the impossible. He broke Purple 18 months before Pearl Harbor. He gave American leaders the ability to read Japan's diplomatic secrets. He warned them war was coming. He identified the exact moment Japan planned to strike, and 2,403 Americans still died. Friedman doesn't speak for 3 days. When he finally returns to work, his team notices he's different, quieter, more withdrawn. His wife Elizabeth later writes in her diary, "William keeps asking, 'What was it all for?' I don't know how to answer him." Here's the cruel reality of Friedman's situation. He did everything right. His mathematical genius was flawless. His persistence was extraordinary. His achievement, building Purple without ever seeing it, was one of the greatest intellectual accomplishments of the 20th century. But intelligence isn't the same as action. Knowing isn't the same as preventing. The problem wasn't code breaking. The problem was that Purple only carried diplomatic messages. Japanese diplomats in Washington didn't know the specific attack plans. Tokyo deliberately kept them in the dark. The actual operational orders, attacking Pearl Harbor specifically, were sent through JN25, the Navy code that American cryptanalysts wouldn't fully break until mid-1942. Even if Pearl Harbor had received the warning on time, would they have been ready? The attack came from a direction most strategists thought impossible, carriers crossing the Pacific in complete radio silence. American commanders in Hawaii were warned about sabotage from the Japanese population, not an air attack from the ocean. Friedman understands all this intellectually, but emotionally, he can't escape the weight of it. The story doesn't end at Pearl Harbor. In many ways, that's where William Friedman's real tragedy begins. For the next 4 years, Friedman continues working in signals intelligence. His purple breakthrough allows the United States to read Japanese diplomatic traffic throughout the war. Magic provides crucial intelligence about Japanese intentions, German-Japanese coordination, and neutral countries' diplomatic maneuvering. In 1943, Magic intercepts reveal that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, will be flying to inspect Japanese bases in the Solomon Islands. His exact flight path and timing are in a purple encrypted message. American P-38 fighters intercept and shoot down Yamamoto's plane on April 18, 1943. It's the most significant targeted assassination of World War II, made possible by Friedman's purple breakthrough. But Friedman takes no satisfaction in it. By late 1944, colleagues notice he's struggling. He's making uncharacteristic mistakes. He's missing work. He seems haunted. In January 1945, William Friedman has a complete nervous breakdown. He's admitted to the psychiatric ward at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. His diagnosis: psychoneurosis, anxiety state, severe. The official medical report says it's from overwork and exhaustion. But his wife and close colleagues know the truth. Friedman is suffering from what we'd now call moral injury. He broke the unbreakable code. He saw the future, and he couldn't stop what he saw from happening. He spends 3 months in treatment. When he returns to work, he's no longer the same driven genius who attacked Purple with relentless intensity. He's slower, more cautious, haunted by the gap between knowledge and power. After the war, the Army awards Friedman the Medal for Merit, one of the highest civilian decorations, for his cryptanalytic work. The citation calls his purple breakthrough an achievement without parallel in the history of cryptology. But Friedman keeps the medal in a drawer. He rarely talks about Purple. When younger cryptanalysts ask him about the achievement, he deflects, crediting his team, minimizing his own role. In a rare interview in 1958, a reporter asks Friedman what he's most proud of in his career. Friedman pauses for a long time. Then he says, "I'm proud we shortened the war. I wish we could have prevented it." But there's one more chapter to this story that remains classified until 1977. And when it finally becomes public, it forces us to completely reassess what William Friedman accomplished and what it cost him. In the late 1970s, the National Security Agency begins declassifying World War II intelligence files. Researchers gain access to the full Magic archive, not just the diplomatic messages, but the metadata, dates, times, distribution lists. They discover something shocking. Between September 25, 1941, when Friedman's Purple Machine first worked, and December 7, 1941, American intelligence decrypted and translated over 1,000 Japanese diplomatic messages. Many contained clear warnings that war was imminent. But of those 1,000 messages, only about 50 were distributed to President Roosevelt and top military commanders. The rest were buried in bureaucratic channels, deemed not actionable, or withheld due to security concerns about protecting magic. In other words, Friedman gave American leaders X-ray vision into Japanese intentions. But the system around him, the military bureaucracy, the intelligence distribution protocols, the turf wars between Army and Navy intelligence, acted like cataracts, blocking the vision from reaching the people who needed to see it. One message in particular haunts historians. On November 28, 1941, 9 days before Pearl Harbor, Tokyo sent a purple encrypted message to its embassy in Washington. The decrypt included the phrase, Relations between Japan and the United States have reached the point where they are about to be ruptured. The message was decrypted by Friedman's team within 2 hours. It was translated within 6 hours. It was on the desk of Army intelligence, where it sat for 3 days before being distributed to the White House, marked routine. By the time it reached President Roosevelt, the sense of urgency had been filtered out through multiple administrative layers. This is the moment where we understand the full weight of what William Friedman carried. He didn't just break a code. He opened a window into the future, a clear, undistorted view of what was coming. And then he watched as the institutions around him failed to look through that window, or looked but didn't act, or acted but too slowly. The tragedy of William Friedman isn't that he failed. It's that he succeeded brilliantly at a task that turned out to be insufficient. Cryptanalysis can reveal secrets, but it can't compel action. It can't overcome bureaucratic inertia. It can't force military commanders to believe the unbelievable. It can't bridge the gap between what intelligence agencies know and what decision makers accept. Friedman spent the rest of his life understanding this truth. Sometimes seeing the future clearly is the cruelest burden of all. In the days after Pearl Harbor, William Friedman's Purple Machine becomes one of America's most valuable intelligence assets. As Japan expands across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, magic intercepts provide crucial warnings about Japanese strategy. The Battle of Midway in June 1942, the turning point of the Pacific War, is won partly because Navy codebreakers, building on techniques Friedman pioneered, break enough of JN-25 to reveal Japan's target. The Purple Machine continues reading diplomatic traffic that helps confirm the intelligence. Friedman trains dozens of new cryptanalysts for the war effort. His techniques for attacking machine ciphers become the foundation for American signals intelligence for the next 3 decades. But personally, he never fully recovers from the psychological wound of Pearl Harbor. William Friedman continues working in cryptology until his retirement in 1955. He becomes the chief cryptologist for the newly formed National Security Agency. He trains the next generation of American codebreakers. His methodologies, particularly the idea that you can reverse engineer an encryption machine by analyzing its outputs, become fundamental to modern cryptanalysis. The Purple Machine itself has an interesting fate. After the war, American officials discover that Friedman's reverse-engineered version is actually slightly different from the original Japanese Purple Machines. The Japanese had made small modifications over time, and Friedman's team, working blind, had independently invented equivalent solutions to the same engineering problems. In other words, Friedman didn't just break Purple, he independently reinvented it. When Japanese cryptographers learn this after the war, they're stunned. Several refuse to believe it until they see Friedman's machine themselves. One Japanese engineer, who worked on the original Purple, tells an American interrogator, "If someone told me this was possible, I would have said they were describing science fiction." Today, the National Cryptologic Museum at Fort Meade, Maryland displays one of Friedman's Purple machines next to an original Japanese Purple machine captured after the war. Visitors can see how remarkably similar they are, and marvel at the fact that one was built by engineers with blueprints, and the other by a mathematician working with nothing but encrypted messages. Friedman's achievement foreshadows modern cryptanalysis. When cybersecurity researchers today reverse engineer malware or attack encryption systems without source code, they're using conceptual approaches Friedman pioneered in 1940. But the gap between intelligence and action that haunted Friedman remains relevant. In 2001, intelligence agencies had fragments of information suggesting terrorists were planning attacks using aircraft. In 2003, intelligence about Iraqi weapons programs reached policymakers, but was interpreted through political lenses. In 2020, early warnings about pandemic threats existed but weren't acted upon quickly enough. The lesson isn't that intelligence doesn't matter. It's that intelligence is necessary, but not sufficient. You need collection. You need analysis. You need distribution. You need decision makers who trust the intelligence and act on it decisively. And you need all of that to happen at the speed of events. Friedman gave America the ability to read Japanese secrets 18 months before Pearl Harbor. But those 18 months weren't enough to overcome institutional inertia, military complacency, and the fundamental difficulty of acting on warnings about events that seem impossible until they happen. William Friedman dies in 1969 at age 78. His obituary in the New York Times runs under the headline, "Cryptologists broke Japanese code before Pearl Harbor." Even in death, he can't escape that asterisk. Before, but not soon enough. But people who knew him in his final years say he eventually made peace with his legacy. Not by dismissing Pearl Harbor. He never did that. But by focusing on what came after. The intelligence that shortened the war. The lives saved at Midway and in subsequent battles. The cryptanalysts he trained who went on to protect American communications throughout the Cold War. His wife, Elizabeth, who was herself a legendary codebreaker, says in an interview late in her life, "William used to say that breaking purple was like being given the ability to see through walls. But he learned that seeing through walls doesn't mean you can knock them down. That takes different tools." William Friedman's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Genius and hard work aren't always enough. Sometimes you can do everything right, make no mistakes, accomplish the impossible, give decision makers every advantage, and still watch the catastrophe unfold. But his story also shows us why the work still matters. Purple might not have prevented Pearl Harbor, but it helped win the war. The intelligence might not have stopped the first blow, but it helped America strike back more effectively. In the end, Friedman's legacy isn't defined by what he couldn't prevent. It's defined by what he made possible. The ability to see clearly in a world that prefers darkness, the courage to pursue impossible goals, and the resilience to keep working even when success feels like failure. Because sometimes breaking the unbreakable code is its own victory, even when the larger war is just beginning. The story of Purple is just one of thousands of untold stories from World War II. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, of invisible battles fought in rooms with worksheets and stepping switches, of victories that looked like defeats and sacrifices that changed history. Some of those stories remain classified, others are simply forgotten, but they all share something in common. They remind us that history isn't made just by generals and politicians. It's made by mathematicians working 14-hour days, by engineers solving impossible problems, by people who see what needs to be done and refuse to accept that it can't be done. This is the hidden history of World War II, and there's so much more to discover.